I believe that we live in a time when there's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to carve out the kind of world that we want to live into. Now, I understand, and I think you would too, that utopias are kind of out of the question, in some sense. However, I think this is a relatively unique time, and I've been wishy-washy in my own mind about exactly the kind of context we might be moving into right now. And I think it is, as I just said, quite radically unique in a few different ways. In particular, like I would call it the Green Revolution, or like in spirodynamics, which is a system of developmental psychology and values, or postmodernism, it too came about through a number of different waves, strata. You first see sort of postmodernism in its sort of infancy in probably like the Hegelian model. Now Hegel is highly rational, but he presents what has been called the dialectical mode of thinking. And why this differs from straight formal logic is that it realizes that healthy reason, or more mature reason, that is to say, more mature than formal logic reason, is one that can hold paradoxes. So with dialectical reasoning, you have a thesis and an antithesis. And notice that the two are sort of opposing each other, and that the movement forward in some regard is the synthesis. Now this has been hopped on top of in the last little while, and I think this is, well, we'll come back to that perhaps near the end of this video. The integrative modality, which is just the idea that synthesizing more holistic worldviews into a simple yet comprehensive view, is quite desirable, especially in a time when you have massive amounts of information, but it's not coded in a very easy to follow way. And so these integrative models are highly useful because they give one an easy ability to kind of jump into a particular area of knowledge and then connect it with other areas of knowledge. And I personally believe this is the future of academia. I live in Squamish, BC, and it's one of the first places to have a highly disciplinary, interdisciplinary university for bachelor students, and it lays down a highly connected framework of economy to art to science, many different topics, and then they kind of connect them, and then you choose your direction. So it's more grounded in the kind of comprehensive skills you need to survive in a highly complex world and becomingly more chaotic. So this model of integrative thinking, you know, I see its early, you know, formations maybe in like Nietzsche, with his sort of existentialist view of history in some regards. And he actually kind of created this duality of history on the advantages and disadvantages of history in life, his book, one of his later works. And this duality in history, in my view, is actually an objectification of the postmodern way of thinking. What I mean by that is that he was saying that there are two primary ways of viewing history, at least more than this, but dichotomizing the two. So he's taking dialectics too, and presenting it on history itself, which is interesting. And in doing this, he's sort of objectifying dialectics, I believe, into these value structures that evolve over time. And so it kind of concretizes the different ways of looking at the world. So what I mean by that is, one way of being a historical being is to look at history and be sort of ignorant of it. That is, you know, you're highly engaged in it, you're passionate about it, and in some regards, you're actually missing the ever fluxing and flowing of passions, which is itself sort of relative, but almost inconsequential, maybe. But it's these people that engage in history somewhat ignorantly that make the most impact in his view. And so you get the kind of supermen, as it were, quote unquote. Maybe this is a stretch, maybe. But these sorts of people, because they're taking history quite seriously, maybe. But arguably those that don't take it seriously, kind of paradoxically, are sort of super historical. You might think of these kind of as like the mystics or something like this. He doesn't use that word, but it kind of seems to be sort of representative. And these people sort of see history as this fluxing and flowing of different sorts of passions, different sorts of values that sort of have a pattern to them, maybe developmentally. He doesn't actually say that, but you know, you can almost attune that to him. And so interestingly, these sorts of people often don't make the biggest impact in history just because of the fact that they're not really taking history very seriously. He doesn't take that extra step in saying, you know, but he's actually doing it in a sense, that an integration of the two, history as serious and history as unserious, or rather the blurring between the two, is perhaps the middle road of being. But in doing that, you're kind of losing the intensity of either one, maybe. And that's a strange problem that sort of arises out of the integration of the two ways of dealing with history, if that makes any sense. I'll try to rephrase that briefly, so that, you know, one way of being in history and involved in history and creating big footmarks, and the other one being highly disengaged from history, but seeing it and being wise. You know, the other isn't wise necessarily, just intelligent. The integration of the wisdom and intelligence in some ways sort of butts the edges, perhaps, of both of those. Or it takes a radically strong individual to hold both in a deeply profound way. I'm just rambling here. I'll leave her there.